Hello and welcome to Global Order. My name is Ishan Dhar. Joining me today to discuss his recent title, co-authored with Nandita Rajhansa, is Mr. Saurabh Mukherjea. Saurabh Mukherjea is the founder of Marcellus, an investment firm here in India, and he's also the author of six best-selling books. Today we'll be discussing Behold the Leviathan, the unusual rise of modern India, which, as I mentioned earlier, he co authored with Nandita Rajhansa and was published by Penguin a few months ago. The book explores India's economic rise in great detail, going far beyond any stereotypes, and rather pertinently, also explores what opportunities India might have in the future. Stay tuned, this is going to be a very exciting discussion. Saurabh, thank you very much for taking the time out to do this, joining
My
us.
pleasure.
It's
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting
very
me.
exciting to speak to you after going through this book. To start off, you discussed that there have been very polarized narratives about India's economy in
Mm.
published literature. You know, it's either an absolute disaster or it's the next best thing since sliced bread. What gaps did you and your co-author seek to address in this book? I think you mentioned three dimensions,
Sure.
perhaps more.
Sure. So look, I mean, just first off, when we said that there are polarized narratives, we didn't mean to sort of say that everybody who's covered India doesn't know what they're talking about. Clearly, a lot of
Right.
people have done a lot of work on India, especially empirical economists have done a lot of work on India. The reason narratives in India tend to be polarized is it's a vast country. Data availability is patchy, and
Right.
therefore it's very difficult unless someone puts in a lot of effort, a lot of time over many years to travel extensively through pretty much every state and spends a lot of time collecting specific data on different parts of the country. It's very difficult to quantitatively capture or qualitatively capture the expansion and the degree of nuance in the picture. Right
Right.
now, in this courtesy these challenges of vast geography and patchy data, I
Right.
think three aspects of India are poorly covered in the popular discourse. The first is like any other free market economy, it is prone to economic cycles. Right,
Right.
typically when these cycles occur, both the global media and professional economists tend to either overhype the recovery or become prophets of kind of a latter day doomsday scenario for India. If there's a downturn, you get prophets saying it's all over for India, this is the next brick to fall, etc. Right? Neither of those are true. When an economic recovery is either underway, India isn't the next China, and when there is a cyclical downturn underway, as is the case currently, this is not the next. This is not the next Brazil, right?
Right.
So I think that's the first weakness in the discourse. If an economy like America turns down, it's seen as a cyclical downturn.
Right.
If a country like India turns down, it's seen as the beginning of the end, right? Which is obviously nonsensical. The second challenge is like in any other poor country, like in any other emerging economy, a la say Japan after the Second World War, or Taiwan in the 60s, 70s, or Korea in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Development in India is creating a class of super rich people, right?
Right.
That's always the way countries are developed. Britain in the Industrial Revolution, America in the 50 years prior to the Second World War. Economic development, rapid economic development necessarily creates a class of super rich people. The middle class doesn't really arrive till $10,000 per capita income. But Western economists delight in writing about inequality in India, as if this is the first country in the history of the planet where economic development has been unequal, right? So that's the second challenge, right? And because many people who read this sort of critiques of India by either Western economists or by economists trained in the West, they believe this is somehow an anomaly in India.
Right.
That they believe that somehow India's economic growth is anomalous. That we are creating a class of super rich people. It isn't. This is far from the course, right? And the third aspect which is really poorly covered in popular discourse in India is the interplay between social change and economic change, right? In no country does the economy develop in a vacuum, right? You
Right.
can't just say, other than in the minds of economists, in no other real world setting does economic development take place without social development alongside. Because in India, social development has so many myriad faces, right? There's
Yeah,
women's development, there's a caste dimension to it, there's perhaps even a religious dimension to it, there's obviously a regional dimension to it, right? That aspect of India's development, how society is changing, by and large, society is changing without the good offices of NGOs, not for profits, the government of India, or indeed foreign institutions. Society is changing, and by and large, that change is positive,
right,
and that positive change in turn is spurring economic development, right? And all of these three fronts, economic cycle, the rise of inequality as growth keeps on, continues staying at a robust number for now the third decade, and social change. These three fronts make India's growth, India's ascent far more nuanced and far more interesting
right.
than most polarized accounts of India.
Correct. And on that note, you actually brought up a very interesting concept, which is like goes beyond economics as well, and that is a master narrative. So, for those of us who don't know, what is a master narrative, and how has India's master narrative changed? Yeah, I mean, you've
Right.
described this in quite some detail in the
Yeah.
book.
So master narratives are no, it's a creation of sociologists. It's
Right,
something that I learned myself while writing the book. Master narratives are the stories we tell ourselves when we think about a particular phenomenon. So if you take, say, Indian cricket, the story in Indian cricket is IPL and the rise of talent from the grassroots and the rise of people like Sachin Tendulkar and Virat Kohli. It's the master narratives tend to be kind of psychological. I think of them as psychological coat hangers. The
right,
psychological coat hangers is how you structure your cupboard, and you hang your t-shirts here and your overcoat over there and your shirt over there. So master narratives are the stories we tell ourselves when
right,
we try to understand a particularly tricky phenomenon, right?
right,
So I was saying that the master narrative around Indian cricket tends to be around the IPL because it's a very vivid master narrative. Uh, Cricketers from very modest backgrounds rising up the ranks, becoming multi millionaires by playing the IPL or the women's IPL, which is now the richest sports league in the world after the women's NBA. Right.
right,
Similarly, in economic life, there are master narratives about countries, right?
right,
Perhaps the best known master narratives in economic life is China's master narrative. This is a kind of
right,
all-conquering master narrative. China is the manufacturing hub of the world. Everything is made in China, and you can understand, right? This it's such a complicated story as to why China has risen, but the way
But yeah, the
Western
China growth story is still popular, although that's not
That's right.
necessarily the
So the
case
one line,
anymore.
the
Yeah,
one line simplification is China is the workshop of the world, right? And in a way, that's enough. The human brain says, "Well, I understand China. It's the workshop of the world." So that's why master narratives can be very powerful. If you can simplify a country's development narrative into one or two master narratives, it becomes the hanger, the intellectual coat hanger that everybody uses. And therefore, in this book, we said that look, India's master narrative over the last 20, 25 years actually has become very positive.
right,
As someone who migrated to India 16 years ago, I've seen that change firsthand. From
right,
a despondent master narrative to an optimistic master narrative. Naturally, in any master narrative, the people who lead a country, Xi in China or Deng
right,
Xiaoping in China, and in India's case, Modi, they will obviously have a bearing on the master narrative. And you can't blame them for saying, "I want to shape the master narrative to suit my needs." Right.
right,
So in India's case, the master narrative has become more positive in the last generation or so. It's manifest in every aspect of Indian life. In our book, we have tried to frame the master narrative around five themes. We call it WESCO in short: women, the rise of a new educated elite, rise of South India, China's ceding some economic ground to India, and finally outsourcing of not just IT, but pretty much every type of office job is getting outsourced to India. So we call it WESCO. That's the master narrative around which we have hung our economic construct.
You had also mentioned uh, greater security in India, as in terms of India's security policy having an impact on this master narrative. Can you delve into that just a little bit?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting point, right? And
Right,
I hadn't sort of that it hadn't hit me until it was, I think it was just coming out of COVID 3 years or so ago, 3 or 4 years ago. And I remember walking back from work one night. It was late. I worked till say 10 o'clock at night,
right,
and I was passing by a bus stop in Mumbai, right? And it was a deserted street. There was a bus stop, and there was a young lady waiting for a bus, and she had headphones on, she had earplugs. She was listening to music, and she put her feet up on the bus stand, kind of the rod which supports the bus stand, right?
right,
And it was a picture of total confidence and poise and calm, right, at 10 o'clock at night on a deserted Mumbai street. And that's when it struck me that over the last generation, life and limb have become far more secure in India.
right,
Crime has fallen dramatically, and one simple way to capture the dramatic drop in crime is the number of Indians losing their lives to terrorist or criminal incidents used to be as high as 2,500 a year 30 years ago. That's now fallen to less than 100 a year. Right? So imagine this is a country of 1.5 billion people.
yeah,
No more than two people a week are losing their lives to terrorists, insurgents, and antisocial elements. 2,500 down to less than 100 in the space of a generation. I think that's a measure of India's achievement in creating a secure, stable society where life and limb are safe. And that's the beginning of your journey to becoming a better society. And that I think is the foundation of the change in India's master narrative.
correct. And you also mentioned that despite many improvements, and you also hear this a lot among the investment community, that a lot more could be done with regards to ease of doing business in India. In your opinion, what further could be done? What steps could be taken?
I think two parts to it. One is as in any part of the world, right? As in any part of the world, we have a small business and we have a small office in New York. We are trying to open an office in one of the offshore isles in the Atlantic Ocean. As in any part of the world, as an economy grows, and especially as the financial services economy grows, there is a tendency of the regulator to create rules and regs. I think that if that can be checked to some extent in India, then India's growth can be a little bit more smoother because if after this early stage of development, if at this early stage of development the per capita income in India is only $2,500,
Right.
if we create an overly bureaucratic financial services sector as exists in Europe, I think we'll just end up creating a very high cost of doing business in a critical sector of the economy. I think the second aspect of it is not so much rules and regs. The second aspect of it is corruption. And I'm not talking about corruption in high office. I'm talking about petty, routine, day-to-day corruption.
Right,
It's diminished to a considerable extent because of the rise of doing business digitally.
right,
Right? If you file your tax returns digitally, as we do in India, if all your exchanges with the powers that be are digitally, it's harder for extortion to take place. But I don't think it's impossible for extortion to take place. And I think if uh, if the petty rank and file aspect of how the bureaucracy deals with the business sector can be smoothened out further, I think that would do a power of good to India.
and you think greater digitization is the way to go there?
It's helped. It's clearly helped, right? If I compare today versus say when my wife and I got married 25 years ago, let's just put it like this: that just our marriage certificate itself, getting our marriage certificate itself, wasn't a smooth task in
Right,
the year 2000. In contrast, when our son was born 16 years ago, getting his birth certificate was far easier, and even more recently, 6 years ago, when Marcellus was born, creating Marcellus took 1 hour on my laptop.
oh yeah,
So it's a journey, right? So my marriage, painful affair in terms of the legalese around the marriage. My son's birth, reasonably easy, took just a day to get the birth certificate. Creating Marcellus, 1 hour on the laptop, you're done.
excellent. And I found this to be pretty fascinating as well. When it comes to economic policy making in India. You describe four critical issues or questions that policymakers have grappled with. And you also link them to four 20th century Indian
Yeah,
thinkers.
yeah.
How would you say successive governments have grappled with these questions over time, and where do we find ourselves today?
So let me just to sort of quickly take those issues one by one. So I think the
Right,
first issue, which continues to, I think, be at the forefront of India's development concern, is do we focus on soft infrastructure, e.g., healthcare, e.g., education, or should we focus on hard infrastructure,
right,
roads, power plants, and so on? Um, I think every 10 years, the policy making apparatus in India oscillates between hard and soft.
right,
And part of me just says that whatever's been done in the last decade, the next generation of policymakers says, well, let's do the opposite. That being said, I think the current dispensation's focus from the get-go, when the NDA took charge in 2014, the current dispensation's focus has been hard infrastructure. The fact that in spite of their focus on hard infrastructure, women's education has made the colossal strides which I describe in Behold the
right,
Leviathan. Women are now far better educated than men at all levels of the education system. That in spite of the current government's focus on hard infra, women's education has improved leaps and bounds, and a lot of credit should go both to the central government and to the state government because education is a state subject, right? I do raise the point in the book that it's a little bemusing that compared to, say, even a country like Bangladesh, India spends less on education and health as a percentage of GDP. It's a little strange. I've not been able to rationalize that. I
right,
wish that I wish that that deficit vis-a-vis Bangladesh didn't exist, right? But that's the first dilemma. The second is in terms of opening up to the, should we open up the economy to the world and believe that we can deal with the world on equal terms, or should we put up tariff barriers and keep the world at an arm's length, right? And on that, I think the policy, by and large, since independence, has been be really careful of the foreigners. We've been subjugated by the East India Company for long enough. And to be fair, Mahatma Gandhi understood it better than most that if you, as a poor emerging country, try to negotiate fair terms in the global arena, you're going to find it pretty tough, right? And by and large, I think that remains the prevailing wisdom in India that yes, we would love to do more free trade, but hey, show us another country that is willing to let us trade with us on fair terms, and we're happy to trade freely with them. And I think that search continues. We've become a little bit more self-confident as a nation on this subject in the last generation or so,
right.
but there is still, I think, lingering insecurities and uncertainties about will the world trade with us on fair terms, or will we have to settle for an unfair exchange? And the third aspect of this sort of perpetual question is should the government let the free market rip, or do we need the nanny state, the paternal state, the maternal state, supervising and
Right.
superintending in every dimension? On that, I think the Indian state has by and large said, let the free market rip, right? Let the free market run its course. By and large, the current dispensations we will build hard infrastructure. Even in aspects like education and healthcare, the current dispensation seems to be pulling back and letting the free market drift. Whilst the free market here, like me, understands that and supports that, in a country with 1.5 billion people, there are obviously voices who believe that less money should be spent on hard infrastructure and more money should be directed at social causes. But by and large, we've reached after 150 years of quality discourse, in which at its extreme we swung towards extreme socialism. We have now migrated quite some way towards becoming a capitalist free market economy. It fascinates me no end that the world's two best performing stock markets, the world's two best performing stock markets over the last 10, 20, 30 years are the world's two biggest free market democracies, the United States and India. Both are countries that intellectuals love having a go at. The easy countries to go at because these are
Right.
so colorful, noisy countries. But I think the fact that by a country mile, these are the two best performing stock markets over a generation now. These are the only two markets, the United States and India, are the only two markets to give dollar double-digit returns over 10, 20, and 30 years. No other country comes remotely close. I think there's something about free market democracies which lead to these outcomes. Contestability in political life and contestability in the free market. I think those have become the dominant themes in modern India. and the country is better for that.
And coming back to social change for a moment, you did go into the rise of women. You also specifically focus on the rise of women entrepreneurs in the book. How is this phenomenon in some ways a subset of the rise of the new elite that you have described, or are we looking at two very distinct? Uh,
Yeah, great point. Actually,
yeah.
uh, in order to make, in order to keep the narrative uncomplicated in the book, we kept those two phenomena separate.
Right.
But I think you've hit upon something there which I'll probably write about in my future books. So just to take those two narratives separately,
Sure.
right? So the data is very clear from the government. Um, Primary school, high school, and university, there are far more girls studying than boys. And the pass rates for women are in a different planet compared to the pass rate for men.
Right.
The result of that is women are getting the best jobs. They are starting the most successful businesses. Their businesses, there's plenty of data to suggest women run businesses are doing better than men run businesses. The data from the central bank shows women have more money in their bank accounts than men in urban areas. And the data from the mutual fund community shows that in equity mutual fund accounts in urban areas, women have 25% more money, 25% more assets than men do, right? So educational success, professional success, financial success, ding, ding, ding.
Right.
Indian women are hitting it out of the park, and it's just it's incredibly powerful. This will carry on for another generation, and I think the social transformation of this is going to be pretty profound, right? I'm sitting in my office is a little distance away, and I wanted to talk to you in a quiet setting. I've rented a cabin in a startup hub in central Mumbai,
Oh, wow.
and it's a glass cabin. And outside the cabin is the cafeteria of the startup hub. Half the entrepreneurs I can see are young women, right? Actually, more than half the entrepreneurs I can see in the startup hub are young women, right? And I think this is if you go to any startup hub in India, you'll see a similar phenomenon repeated. And second theme is the old anglicized educated elite is being displaced. So we show in the book, our economist Nandita did a brilliant number crunch. Nandita shows in the book that for the first time in Indian history, the boards of the largest Indian companies are now dominated by regular graduates, non-IIT, non-IIM, non-Ivy League, non-Oxbridge, right? So it's regular local graduates now dominate the peak of the highest echelons of corporate life in India. And then joining the story back, the rise of women and the displacement of the anglicized male elite, I think you're right, are
Right.
linked stories. Um, uh, uh, there was a time 20 years ago where if you came from a upper crust family in India, spoke the Queen's English, drank gin and tonic at the right club in Mumbai, your life was made. But now you can still drink gin and tonic. Alcohol is still allowed in most parts of the country. But if you drink gin and tonic during the day, you won't have that much else to do for much of the day. So
Right.
the old and the new are intermingling in India. Bombay still has some very good clubs. They serve good fare, good food, good drink. But eating and drinking there isn't no longer a ticket to success. You need entrepreneurial skills. You need to understand technology. And most importantly, Ishan, what India is showing us is that you need to be able to manage multicultural teams. This is a multicultural country,
Right.
25 languages, four major religions, and the workplace is, especially at the leadership levels, the workplace is multi-gender. So people who can manage those sorts of teams, people spanning 25 languages. I think most offices in the Western world will probably speak with 7 or 8 languages. A
Right.
typical office in India will speak comfortably more than that. Multi-gender, multi-class, right? There'll be people from all echelons of life in India, and the multi-religious. That aspect, that can you manage a team like that? Can you grow that team, make it perform year after year? If you can, there's a high chance you'll break into the new Indian elite.
Fascinating. And coming to opportunities, as you know, China is struggling economically somewhat. They're struggling to implement dual circulation and so forth. You believe that India has a $300 billion plus per annum production opportunity here. How would you describe this opportunity?
You see, China's, and I'm not a science China expert. I wish I was. It's an equally fascinating country. But
Yeah.
what China has done to itself over the last especially 7, 8 years, is a little hard to fathom. They had the world as their oyster, but for reasons best known to China experts, they've chosen to take a belligerent stance vis-a-vis America. America, for its part, seems to have taken a belligerent stance vis-a-vis China because I think what's called the three trap, right? The
Yes.
ascendant power and the established power are going at each other. Now, this conflict between America and China opens up plenty of opportunities and plenty of industries. Unfortunately, in industries which are labor intensive, it's very difficult for India to get a slice of action because in our country it's a free market democracy with high minimum wages. So India's minimum wages are 3x that of Bangladesh. So anything which is labor intensive will either end up in Bangladesh or Vietnam, right? We're not going to get a slice of that. So much as we would aspire to make t-shirts and wind cheaters and sports shoes for the good folks in New York and Los Angeles and London, I think it's going to be tough for us to work our way into labor intensive industries. Where we are probably amongst the best in the world, and certainly right up there with China, is knowledge intensive industries, right? So pharmaceuticals, active pharmaceutical ingredients. China currently is the world leader. We are the only other large country. China makes $150 billion of the stuff. We make barely $10 billion of the stuff. So even if we take 10% market share from China, we will double our API industry, and we can see that's underway. The American pharma companies are swinging some of their API business, active pharmaceutical ingredients business, from China to India, most probably under duress from the US FDA. Right? The US regulator is saying reduce your dependence on China. Similarly, in medical devices, Ishan,
Right.
and similarly in the manufacturing of smartphones and tablets and so on. So these three alone at the moment amount to 50 billion. My reading is over the next 5 years, this will end up becoming the best part of $300 billion, which in India's context is meaningful. $300 billion would be 6-7% of GDP. Some people believe India could get bigger, but I think given India's supply side constraints, labor is expensive, large scale industrial land is hard to get, and cost of capital, working capital is still pretty expensive. Given India's supply side constraints, I think zero to $300 billion in the best part of less than a decade is pretty good going for India. I don't expect more than that, but that itself will be a good start for India in critical industries like API manufacturing, smartphones, and medical devices.
And you also have this interesting section in the book where you describe you almost stumbled onto this by accident in a tier two city in central India.
Yeah, yeah.
You touched upon this earlier that the outsourcing capability is far beyond the IT sector. So, what is this capability? What opportunities are there? What?
Yeah, so what we are seeing is, and I saw both ends of it when I go to America to meet our clients in America, right? Especially in the smaller American cities, you can see there is no spare labor left. Forget forget people who can write code or who can do your accounts or do your marketing strategy. There aren't even taxi drivers in second tier, third tier American cities. There aren't chefs or cooks to cook a hot meal for you at the hotel, right? So there's a endemic labor shortage. And remember, America is a much younger country than Europe is. Europe is a far more demographics in Europe are far more mature than the demographics in America. So by and large, the data from the West shows that both in Europe and America, for white collar jobs, there are now more vacancies than there are people, right? And it's reasonably clear that there simply aren't people in, you know, whether it's in the UK or the US who want to do accounts payroll for a airline or marketing strategy for a bank or the sales strategy for a new car, right? All of those jobs are coming to India. Right, so this is called global capability centers. Global capability centers would be the captive for a Google or a Microsoft or a Jaguar Land Rover or for a Ford or for a Wells Fargo or a JP Morgan. These are captive subsidiaries in India where not only IT people, not only tech experts, but sales, marketing, HR, strategy, payroll, everybody would sit there. Effectively, other than the boardroom and perhaps some customer facing people, other than the boardroom and some customer facing, everything else will get moved to India. Till around 7, 8 years ago, most of these global capability centers were in Bombay, Bangalore, Delhi, Hyderabad. But in the last decade, India has a colossal airport build out. I think we've built some 100 plus airports in the last decade.
Right.
Another 100 odd are planned in the next decade. So as airports come up in smaller towns, such as Indore, such as Nashik, such as Tirunelveli, uh, uh, these global capability centers are going to the smaller towns. That's great news because the smaller towns, land is cheaper, air is cleaner, there's less traffic, and that airport, those new airports could do with some new visitors. So this is actually a happy serendipitous outcome. I don't think when the Indian government built those airports, there any idea that the GCC boom would bring in traffic to Indore or
Just
Coimbatore
a
or Chennai.
happy accident of
Yeah.
sorts, you'd
And
say.
and it's the funny thing about free market democracies, Ishan, they tend to have lots of happy accidents. I don't know why free market democracies tend to have these happy accidents and why they elude countries like China. But hey, this is one of the happiest accidents in India. But this is big bucks. So when I wrote the book, when Nandita researched that chapter, I remember she dug out the data, 1,700 GCCs. And we basically wrote that chapter roughly a year ago, right?
Right.
Today, there are 2,500 GCCs. So India's basically adding GCC, a couple of GCCs a day. India is adding a couple of GCCs a day. A typical global capability center employs 10,000 people. And by Indian standards, they get paid pretty well. Per capita income of the country as a whole is $2,500. A typical GCC employee will get $20,000. So a typical GCC job is 10x almost 10x the per capita income. And a typical GCC employs 10,000 such people. So big boost to the economy. Those Fortune 500 companies who can't find labor in the West to save their lives are getting good people. And our India's tier two, tier three cities are getting filled up with good jobs, which will then lead to good schools, housing complexes, etc., etc. That's how development flows.
Right. Before we close off, I'd like you to touch upon this because this is important. Um, for those of our viewers who are not familiar with the term, could you please explain what India Stack is,
Right.
and what does AI possibly open up with
Sure.
regards to India Stack? Because I think
Sure.
that's
So let me start with
very
this.
interesting.
So in 2009, the then chairman of Infosys, Nandan Nilekani, he left his job in Infosys, joined the government, and created something called Aadhaar. So Aadhaar is a unique ID number. Every Indian has one. This is my Aadhaar card. This is my Aadhaar ID. Right.
Right.
So every Indian has one of these. Mapped onto this number is my biometrics, my retina, and my fingerprints. Right. Um, Narendra Modi became prime minister in 2014. He and Nandan Nilekani met for one of those memorable cups of coffee. And Narendra Modi realized that Aadhaar can be enormously powerful. So what Modi ji did was he said, we will get 500 million more bank accounts opened so that every adult Indian has a bank account. And we will get the bank accounts and the Aadhaar ID mapped onto each other. Right. So that was step two. 2016, Mr. Mukesh Ambani said, I want to have the biggest phone network in India. So I will provide voice voice free and data almost free. Right? The cheapest mobile data in India costs are 140 of America. And he and the government then, and I think Nandan would have had a role in this as well, said we will then map bank account, Aadhaar with mobile. Right? So Jandhan is the bank account.
Right.
Jandhan is the bank account. Aadhaar is the ID and mobile is mobile. So my Aadhaar ID and my phone and my bank account are synced into each other. Then Nandan came up with a brilliant idea. Nandan said, well, if your bank account and your Aadhaar are anyway synced up, why don't we just use this to pay money? So I'm sitting in this startup hub. I went and bought a coffee for myself for this chat. I touched my wallet and the guy said, we don't take credit cards. And that's the default in India. So I used my phone to pay through UPI. I used my phone, money left my phone or my bank wallet through my phone. 55% of Indian GDP gets transacted like this, phone to phone, right, through the India Stack. Right now that's just one of the use cases. India Stack is also used when I go to the airport in Mumbai tomorrow to catch a flight to Chennai. I won't have to pull out any ticket because my airline ticket I mapped it to my Aadhaar a few 5 minutes ago. So I'll go to the airport. I'll just stare into a camera. My Aadhaar is also scanned into the. Remember, Aadhaar is mapped onto my retina.
Your biometrics, yeah.
Yeah, my biometrics. So the camera will just look at me and the gates will swing open. I'll have to do that twice, stare at the camera twice. and without taking out any ticket, any ID, I will be on a plane, right? So this is the India stack. There are many use cases to it. Now, the next step that Nandan and friends are working on is linking AI to this. Now, why is that powerful? So let's think of a Mizo girl, right? Mizoram is the state in Northeast India. It's a hilly state, it's a remote state. A Mizo girl might say, I'm 17, I want to study physics in Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, but hey, I don't have money, right? What Nandan and folks in IIT Chennai and the government are getting together to build is she will speak into a phone, right? And the phone will then use AI to map her to an employer somewhere in India, perhaps in Bangalore, who's happy to have an intern who will do internship for them for 4 years. In return for an engineering intern, that employer will pay the salary, pay the fees at the Indian Institute of Science, right? So there'll be employers who say, these are the sorts of people I need. The employer will punch their data or speak their data into a hub. Aspirants, people who want internships, scholarships, funding for studies, will pump their needs into a database, and there'll be matching. So to do this, you'll have to create bots. Somebody will have to pay to train the bots. Then somebody will have to pay for the GPU burn. Every time an employer or an aspirant expresses a need, there'll be GPU burn. And the third is that all of this will have to be marketed. So hopefully someone watching this will be a philanthropist who said, I want to do this, because whoever does this, whoever pulls this off will leave a legacy for the next multiple generations to celebrate them. So if push comes to shove, I guess the government will end up doing it.
Right.
But given that Aadhaar itself was one man's brainchild, Nandan's brainchild, and he was the chairman of Infosys, he wasn't a government servant at that point. My hope and my reckoning is you will see Indian philanthropists, either someone living in America or in India, saying that I'll pay for this. This will be the making of the next layer, right? But remember, I gave you one use case. I gave you education as a use case. Be healthcare. It could be insurance, right? So the linking of AI with Aadhaar will then create another layer of what's called digital public goods. These are the rails on which India runs. No other country in the world has anything remotely comparable. And this is a massive comparative
Yeah,
advantage.
the rate and scale, I guess, would be unprecedented if
Absolutely. And remember, all this data that's been accumulated over the last decade, it's not been AI, right? Because at the moment it's conventional, old school. These are giant databases which are talking to each other at the moment. If you apply AI to that, there'll be so much more you can do.
Is there a presumed timeline on this, provided everything falls into place?
There's a not-for-profit run by very hardworking volunteers called iSpirit in Bangalore. They are the people who worked with the government on this. They haven't told me the timeline, but my reading is, most things in India, a decade in India is forever. So in a decade, I think if you and I speak again on the continued rise of modern India, a decade ends, I think by and large this will already be done by then.
Well, I look forward to that happening.
Thank you, Asha. Thank you.
Saurabh, thank you very much for your time. That was most insightful. And
my pleasure. Thank you for having me on this program. Thank you.
thank you.